Welcome to the Lubbock or Leave It podcast, a recruiting podcast on RedRaidersports.com. I'm joined every week by my friend here, Ben Golan. I'm Matt Clare, and we want to thank our title sponsor, Carnley Properties. If you are looking for real estate, buying, selling, whether it's a city, out in the country, any type of real estate transaction, I'd encourage you to contact Clayton Carnley and his team. We're very appreciative of their sponsorship, and we'll include all of their contact info here underneath. I hope I mentioned, but the greater Austin area, and really just in general, a great dude and a great Red Raider, has been a part of our community for a while. So maybe even if it's not in that area, he can put you in touch with the right folks. But again, we'll put that info there. But with that being said, Ben, welcome back for another week. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, a lot better after our Cowboys, whooped the Eagles' butts on Monday night.
Yeah.
Definitely saved the football weekend for a lot of people, on the site too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a separation of college and pro for sure, but it didn't hurt. But yeah, Saturday was a beating. I think we've written plenty about that. I don't think there's any breath we need to waste here on this pod. What we really wanted to get into, just sort of moving forward this week, we can round it out as usual with our thoughts in season on the upcoming game this weekend in West Virginia. However, we always tie things back to recruiting on the Lubbock or Leave It podcast, and we've seen more and more 2023 offers. We now have 40 offers recorded. We wanted to get into that a little bit, Ben. But the one thing I did want to talk about is through 4 games, you're a third of the way through the season. I thought it was just important to talk about, we talk a lot about strategy. We talk a lot about a plan, that you have on the recruiting trail. And, a big part of Coach Wells and his staff and his recruiting staff's plan has been leaning on that transfer portal. And I know every team goes through injuries, but it was just kind of, it's unfortunate across the board. But, of course, I'm mentioning quarterback Tyler Shuck, who had the shoulder injury diving into the end zone of all things. So you're kind of back to where you were last year with Columbia. Certainly Smith is healthy, and you've got Morton just sort of wet at the gills to potentially get into a game. So we'll see how that pans out over the next 8 games. But then, you turn to the other side on defense, and you really saw, the depth get challenged by a top Big 12 program, or a top Power 5 program, if you will, in the country. And, now Muddy Waters, who showed so much promise. I think you even put Muddy Waters Stan account, as just a running joke on the website message board. But he's now gone with a shoulder injury or pec injury of his own. So you really did have 2 of your standouts on both offense and defense, lost for the year. You've got other, as we record this podcast, there's news coming in of potentially more starters going to be out this weekend or for an extended period of time. So, we're here again, been another season. Injuries happen to all teams, like I said, but just rounding it out to that recruiting that's sort of that crossroads that you're at, right? When you go to the transfer portal, because if a young man hurts his knee or his pec or his shoulder or something goes awry, the program doesn't stop. The football season doesn't stop. So all that development, all that depth, all those things that you've built, those tables shift pretty quickly when you look at that. And so I guess moving forward, it wouldn't surprise me to see potentially how that affects how many spots that open up. How many with COVID seasons and all of that, how many kids can stay? Do they get this extra year? Medical redshirt at this point in the season is nothing to say that couldn't happen. Seems pretty doable. But all that to say, Ben, when those things happen, and you look at the roster right now, you've got a lot of new guys and you've got a lot of young guys. To me, the only bright side I can see from a recruiting standpoint is, when you open up the recruiting classes and you look down the lists a little bit more, you get to the Kobe Miners, you get to the Jonathan Davises, you get to some guys that are not necessarily brand new, but a couple years into the program. And this is Matt Wells' program. You'd kind of like to see some of those guys get into the game, and fill some of these gaps, whether it's depth or whether it's a lost starter. And I just wanted to kick it off there, because for me, it's losing games. We've been doing that for a decade. Those games like that on Saturday, it's a gut punch. It makes you want to turn off the TV, not watch football the rest of the day, right? Cowboys cheer you up, thank God. But then, looking forward, you kind of reevaluate the rest of the season, Ben. And so I don't know. I know that's a lot, but, really just wanted to kind of get your thoughts because, I'd gone back and forth on that a little bit earlier, planning for the show.
Yeah, you always want to see, first of all, injuries are really unfortunate, especially to Shuck and Waters, who were two leaders and kind of captains on their side of the ball. And then you mentioned, a redshirt. Waters did not use one at Duke, and so he played 4 games this year. So he actually could redshirt and return next year if he so wishes, which is important. But yeah, I mean, you have the specifically, I'm thinking at safety here to replace Waters. You do have some depth there, guys who have played this year. Eric Monroe, Reggie Pearson, both of those are transfers. And then Adrian Fry, who's kind of bounced around between corner and safety, and Dadrion Taylor. But beyond that, some of the young guys you mentioned, Kobe Minor and Jonathan Davis and Nate Floyd too. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to see those guys, the younger guys, some more, honestly, against Texas once the game got out of hand. I texted that to you. I would have wanted to see, Jerron Bradley at receiver. But that's game specific. Once it starts getting out of hand, I want to see what the young guys do. See them play well and give hope for the future. When you're getting, when you're down 40 points, why it doesn't matter if a senior makes a tackle or a play. I mean, what do you get out of that? So I don't know. That's it's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just brings to light how it's all about risk, right? Everything, your job, my day job, this job the coaches have in recruiting, how long do we wait? We what was the news of yesterday? Jacob Zeno's transferring from Baylor. I mean, dude, how many times do we talk about Jacob Zeno on a similar podcast or article or something where, he was Cliff's guy and they were waiting on Zeno and Zeno. And then later it was Maverick McIver, and none of that matters right now. So it's almost like, we talk about this and, I don't, maybe that's a glass half full, an analogy or perspective there. But year to year, these things change, right? Some years you're going to get a Morton, and some years you're going to have, good health at these positions we talk about. So I know that's a roll of the dice, but again, there is more risk taking these kids from another program where they want to come over as a graduate, with 1 to 2 years of eligibility, some potentially 3, as I mentioned with the COVID year. And then you kind of mix that up and you hope that you can kind of build the continuity with that roster. So it does inherently introduce more risk to that recruiting process. So I'm just interested to see, what can happen over the rest of the season. I do think that Columbia looked okay. Again, kind of tying it back to recruiting. That's a young man they knew at Utah State. He came over as a transfer a couple years ago, right? Thank goodness he played last year. He's going to need to play a bunch this year. And so I thought he got in there and made the most of his opportunity. So there's definitely some pros, there's some cons. I think this will affect the defense much more. And I'm interested to see kind of the morale and the true depth. Because, dude, if you go back and look at what we talked about last week, I mean, pretty laughable to think that, that was the same team we were talking about, last week that played on Saturday. But, hopefully they can bounce back and really kind of put something together moving forward. But kind of the next thing that we wanted to talk about recruiting wise, Ben, was we're seeing an uptick in 2023 offers. But along those same lines, if the offers are at 40 total and it's about to be October of 2021, the 2022 class, they're all going to sign in December. So if you're recruiting them now, or if you're hoping to sign them in December or February at the latest of next year, your class is pretty much what it's going to be unless they totally take a left turn. And like I had said earlier, open up a few more spots for high school players. But you see that trend continuing into 2023. If you've only offered 40 kids at this point, mathematically speaking, you're going to get 1 or 2 of those at best. And there could be some, legacies or some longtime targets that buck that trend. But I guess, Ben, any concern with only having 40 at this point in the year?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of concern. It feels like, we did this podcast, last year or the year before, even back when when Cliff was the head coach, and it just seems like it doesn't matter who's in charge, that Tech maybe is running a little late on some of these offers. I don't know if that's actual fact or just feel, but it certainly feels that way. And that, we always like to see new offers, more targets, and potential additions to the class. Well, so the coaches made 4 new 2023 offers this week. I just thought it was interesting. All 4 of those guys already held an offer from the University of Texas. Um, so, I don't know
They
what
all
that's.
held like 20 offers already,
Well,
right?
other
I
than
mean,
other than Jaden Chapman, who has 3, but one of them was first offer
sure.
was Texas, and so it's just interesting. What does that say, that Texas can go in there, offer a prospect first, and then the Red Raiders come in after? Who's the prospect going to look at if they saw the game last weekend? And Chapman or and Darion Gillette, I believe they were both actually there in Austin to see that game. So
Correct.
I just don't know what that says. You see one team look as great as Texas did. You already had an offer from them, and then here comes Tech way down the line with an offer. How much does that actually mean to them? I don't know that answer.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I'm looking off to the side here. I was just doing some stuff on the fly in our database. So this is as far as I've gotten so far, Ben. But just to give the listeners some perspective, we're saying that for the 2023 class, so the kids that are juniors playing this season, Texas Tech has offers out to 40 kids. I haven't even looked at who's committed, who's not, but I would imagine at least a handful of that 40 includes a committed prospect or two. They're young. Does that stick? We don't know. But mathematically speaking, you got to offer, if you're Tech, over the years, I do this nerdy database stuff all the time. You got to offer like 6 point something or 7 point something kids to land one. If it could be less than that, right? Typically we see them anywhere from 100 to 120 offers. We've seen that getting lower and lower with the introduction of the transfer portal, but 40 offers so far in 2023. Texas 106 offers, Texas A&M 139 offers, Baylor 75, TCU 47, Oklahoma 76. That's as far as I'd gotten. But I would just imagine my biggest question is not a critique. It's not anything. It's presenting that as fact and asking why can another program, because I can mark off this list I just took, I could mark off Texas, A&M, and Oklahoma and say fair is fair. They've got resources coming out the wazoo, apples to oranges conversation potentially fair. But then if I go to Baylor, if I go to TCU, if I looked at Oklahoma State, Houston, a few other regionals, SMU, I guarantee they have more than 40 offers. And, the fact of it is recruiting is happening early and earlier all of the time, right? We've already seen the coaches offer 2024 quarterback prospects. So, for me, in this day and age of clicking a few buttons, seeing tape, doing a Zoom, doing all this, to me, that's what I struggle with the most, Ben, is get those offers out there, focus on the kids that are high priorities, find the other kids that pop up at camps and, evaluate them over their junior, senior season, do what you got to do. But at the end of the day, these offers are only official after August 1st or whenever it is when the coaches can send that to the commits and the other kids that are still, earned an official scholarship offer. I don't know, Ben. I don't have an answer. I don't know the right way, the wrong way. But as we sort of started talking about the balance of transfer portal and transfer targets versus high school targets, you look as we sit here tonight. Let me pull it up. The 2022 class has 8 commitments. And, we're all pretty familiar with those. We can post that here when we post the video, but eight total commitments and potentially 2, possibly 3, actual targets that you and I know about. And so knowing all of that with another long explanation, Ben, what is your outlook on the offering, offer process in general, and what you see as just someone that covers recruiting here across the state and knowing these kids? I mean, I think specifically you mentioned Marcus Deal. I believe you saw him over a year ago when he had like no offers or one offer. He's the kid I mentioned has 22 offers. So you're offer number 23. I mean, you got to do a hell of a job to get his attention right now, right?
Yeah, and Deal is a guy. He's coached by Terrence Bullitt. Does some offseason work with him, and so he took visits this summer to Texas, to A&M, to TCU, to SMU. All those programs that previously offered. This is a guy who's a Rivals 250. Probably a guy who, considering all the connections there, should have probably been on their radar before September 2021. But not to hammer too much into that, I think a big, uh, you know, uh, I don't know the word, a big idea, I guess, on the board. If you're a Texas Tech fan, you want to see the coaches either build towards the future and recruit a lot of high school kids or win games, but you can't do neither. And it kind of feels like, yes, they're 3-1. You know, it depends how optimistic or pessimistic you are towards the rest of the season. But, with 8 high school commits, you would certainly hope that, they're winning a significant amount of games because, again, people always say mortgaging the future. Is that right? Is that wrong? I don't know. But you see some of these other programs with 20 high school commits, and it makes you feel like they're building something, maybe more
Right.
than Tech is.
Well, and I'll give you two quick examples, right? Just if we look across college football, I know we're only a third of the way through the season. Let's say in an alternate universe, Matt Wells wins that game in Austin. Tech and the Red Raiders are victorious. They're 4-0. People are talking about, is the program turning a corner? Right now, they absolutely are not, right? It's the opposite. And if you look at two programs that, are either regional, and I know one makes folks cringe, but you look at Baylor, right? They hired Dave Aranda, never been a head coach. It's not like he inherited a nothing program, but the guy before him, Matt Rule, absolutely did. And while he did take a handful of transfers, I mean, they poured resources into Texas high school football. They hired, I think, 4 to 5 Texas high school football coaches. And just the other night, as he's getting ready for Monday Night Football or whatever that was, he's wearing the Texas High School Coaches Association hat on the field. And, they're still retweeting him and loving him for that. So they built something over time, and you saw them go from winning, what was it, 1 or 2 games, and go up, up, and up. So far, everything, I know Coach Wells didn't inherit a good situation, but again, those are two parallels you can easily make because neither did Rule, right? I mean, he had to build from nothing. And so, Wells talked about that all the way back to 2019, 2020 class, building the foundation, having these foundational guys. Well, then when you sprinkle in these transfers, and right away, one of the biggest ones that comes in is Shuck, and he's pretty much toast for the season, if not, late in the season. And we still were learning more about him and what he could or could, couldn't be for this team and this offense. And so same thing with Sonny Cumbie and a lot of these changes. My point there is Aranda comes in last year, stumbles out of the gate, but they seem to be putting something together. And they are putting a heavy emphasis still on the high school scene. And they're a program, like you mentioned, that has 15 to 20 commits, and they just seem to keep adding to that, trusting their early evaluations, getting those guys onto campus and getting them into games. Again, they didn't inherit nothing, but they're making do with what they have. And so I point to that, but then I also point to somebody like Sam Pittman, who's getting a lot of applause at Arkansas, right, for what he's done. I would argue that Chad Morris came in with the whole hashtag and the recruiting acumen and all of that, and some of those key pieces were brought in by Morris, and didn't work out for him as a head coach. But again, they hit the high school scene hard. I mean, that quarterback they have right now, that's Morris. The lot of those players on defense, that's Morris. A lot of those star guys, those are his staff's recruiting acumen. And so it's really hard to pinpoint what is successful and what is not. And I'll go back to it every time. I mean, the bulk of this coaching staff came from Utah State with Matt Wells, and they lived and they died off transfers. Even before transfer portal existed, they had D1 guys that would come to Utah State, and then they had to do some really good evaluations. And so I thought that combination would bode really well for Tech. But so far, been in year 3, we're not seeing that trajectory. And then when you sort of take a quick survey or a short-term opinion or perspective on what these injuries mean, a lot of folks, they're right back down to where they were in the offseason before a 3-0 start, saying, what is the future? What does this look like? What does it look like when Shuck is healthy or comes back? How will Columbia perform, et cetera, et cetera? You can go down the line from some of the things we've already mentioned. But I think just those two examples I want to throw out, Baylor and Arkansas, that's what Tech fans would crave, even if it ended in a 6-7 win season. Just be in the fight, show that improvement. And I think that's all really, they look for in terms of recruiting results. Like you'd said earlier, just win, just be competitive. But this, getting your head bashed in stuff, I mean, that's gotta stop. So
Yeah.
anyway, I think that there's no wrong or right answer. I mean, right now, again, 8 commitments, possibly a couple more from the high school ranks, but then again, you're just waiting to see kind of what happens in the transfer portal. You're waiting to see who's available, what positions you prioritize. And then especially with the new potential rules we touched on last week, Ben, where you can expand and add 7 spots. I mean, we could see, and with the numbers the way they currently are, Ben, would it be insane to see like 12 to 15 transfers come into the program this offseason?
No, it would not. But just to go back to the last point, I think it's, if Texas had won that game 38-35 and not 70-35, this is a whole different conversation. But what was the biggest mismatch in the game, in your opinion? It was the Tech defensive line against the UTO line, right?
That's what I was going to say.
They were getting blown off the ball. There was zero pass rush. PFF said 0 pressures for the whole game, which is pretty incredible. But so you look at the defensive line, and yes, they have good numbers there and some good younger players, but 0 commitments, 0 high school commitments on the defensive line, and 0 targets really. I don't know if we expect them to add a high school defensive lineman in the class as it stands today. No targets, no new offers, and so that's where I think this whole conversation comes in. Where where are you building towards the future? How can you utilize the talent you already have to close the gap on a team like Texas? Because it wasn't even they didn't deserve to be on the field on Saturday. And
Well, and
so
I would say, I would argue the same thing on the O-line, Ben. I mean, you still don't know what some of these, even though Farmer did a great job the past couple of years with a couple prospects in each class. That's great.
yeah,
Most of them project to tackle. They're big old tall dudes. Yeah, sure, you can try to beef them up and put them on the inside, but they haven't recruited anyone specifically for guard or tackle in the past 2 cycles. And then when you look at the transfers, I mean, great. They're probably great young men. They come in with all intents and purposes, but they're not getting the job done against this higher level of competition. And it's not just this year; it goes to last year. And they're highlighting guys where honestly, Ben, if something happened to one of those O-line, it's very thin right now. I mean, you really are relying on a left tackle that played for TCU last year, and so that's how poor the recruiting has been on the offensive line. And I would argue it's worse because you're putting all your chips into these hands that don't make sense when it comes to O-line recruiting. I mean, I would just recruit as many kids as humanly possible. Yes, you have to get the JUCO guys. Yes, you have to get a few transfers. But again, your hit rate and your level of risk when you do one more than the other, it comes with its own set of consequences. And when you run into injuries, when you don't have enough time to build a cohesive unit, and you run into a team like Texas that early in the season, I mean, the biggest frustration I think for most fans that I saw was that both on defense and offense, you never seemed to get any adjustment to what was happening. You just kept rushing 3. You just kept they just take a linebacker and they just bull rush him through the middle. And if it doesn't work, then I mean, Casey Thompson could have made himself a drink back there on Saturday. So anyway, I knew we said we wouldn't just keep going into details of the game, but as you just described that, I had to point out because it's something we talked about last year. Last year, you had 2 late edition JUCO guys or transfer guys starting on your offensive line. You still have those guys rotating in and out depending on the need or the matchups of the week. And then you have Stormont, who came from TCU, and the rest of it, is a combination of other guys, but you still have yet to see any consistency from either group.
Yeah, and to their credit, I do like the young guys, O-line guys that they've added, and Caleb Rogers, Larry Moore, Jacoby Jackson, Jack Tucker. But to your point, those are all in their first or second year, and you don't necessarily want those guys playing yet.
Well, they're all
So,
tackles. I mean,
right,
they're tackles. It's what they
right,
are. I mean,
yeah,
even Dawson Deaton played guard in high school. Weston Wright, sure, he played tackle, but he played for a smaller school. I mean, not saying these guys can't spin inside, but it's going to take a couple of years to develop them. So if one of these junior college guys decides to bounce, transfer, take their eligibility, Storman's got to be done, right? What does that future look like? And so that, I think, from a recruiting standpoint, is worth discussing just as much as the defensive line. I mean, you can look at another program like Clemson. Okay, they're not having a Clemson type of season, but it kills them just as much as it kills any program to lose their top defensive lineman. I mean, it's brutal. And if that can happen to Clemson, then what do you think's happening to Tech if they're on option, whatever, when it comes to the offer sheet and who they really would like versus who they're getting, and then how quickly a true freshman can help versus a junior college guy versus a transfer. I mean, it is very hit or miss, and that's really what I'm trying to get across here. Is when you decide to take that route, you introduce that risk into your program, into your depth, into everything that you do week in and week out. I mean, it's a 12-game season. We're through 4 weeks and the team's already battered and beat up. So what's it going to look like after week 8, Ben? Week 10, right? I mean, it's going to keep happening.
yeah, yeah. I just hope that Tech finds a way this weekend in Morgantown, and we come on here next week, and I don't care whether it's 3-2 or 40-0. We got smiles on our faces, and we're talking about the upward trajectory of the program again. So,
Yeah.
that
I think they're going to have to definitely take a different approach. Letty Brown's not certainly not the same back they saw in Austin, but definitely very good. And they played pretty well in Norman. But I would say West Virginia has been a team that's just as inconsistent as Texas Tech. So I don't want to buy or sell anything 4 weeks into the season. And like I said, credit to Columbia if he can make plays back there and push the ball down the field again. As frustrating as that game is, you score 28 to 35 points most weeks with the way that the defense is played. You're at least in the game, or it's close, or it's a game in the second half. I think people are not okay with losing. I don't want to say that, but they're much less, ready to cut throats and throw people off the side of boats when they lose by a field goal or a few touchdowns than just being dominated like that. I can't imagine a lot of people even watch the second half. I had a coworker who's a Red Raider, and her boyfriend went to Texas. They were at the game. Mason and I thought about driving down, Saturday morning, and I'm just so glad we didn't. I mean, I don't know how she endured that, but she said they stayed all 4 quarters. But yeah, I mean, props to anybody that win, and hopefully it's not the last time they get to play them with all this conference stuff, but it is what it is. And I don't know, 2:30 for me in Morgantown with the injuries and the momentum. I can't predict a win, Ben. I see another loss, whether it's close or not. Doing that on the road is tough for anybody, much less a backup quarterback and, a couple of backups, on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it'll be close, but I picked West Virginia as well in my prediction. So we'll see. Hopefully we're both wrong. And, is West Virginia that good? I don't think so. Like you said, they're inconsistent. So Tech has a chance. They'll need to not turn it over. They'll need to, figure out how to stop a running play. But, it's right in front of them.
Well, man, I know it's late. I know you've got some basketball stuff to write that's coming to the website tomorrow. So if you made it this far, keep your eyes peeled for Ben and the team working on some happenings on for tomorrow. But Ben, anything else before we wrap it up?
Nothing else.
Nothing else. All right.
Past my bedtime.
Exactly. Well, for Ben Golan, I'm Matt Clare. This has been the Lubbock or Leave It podcast on RedRaidersports.com. Thanks for listening. We will see you guys next week.